She had intended to have dinner to celebrate a year together, but her boyfriend arrived late, a smear of lipstick staining his collar. And before Rachel could utter a word, a stranger burst into the restaurant and shouted, "He has been deceiving both of us," horrified and humiliated. Rachel ran through the chaos, her breath sharp and uneven, her heart pounding so violently it felt as if it might tear through her chest. She pushed open a door behind the bar, thinking it might be an exit, but instead stumbled into a dimly lit private room, heavy with a suffocating silence. There, she came face to face with Dominic Cavallo, the most dangerous man in New York and the only one who would reach out when her entire world collapsed. Everything had begun 35 minutes earlier when Rachel Morgan stepped into Le Carmine, the most expensive restaurant on the Upper East Side. Crystal chandeliers hung suspended above, scattering light like falling stars across every glass and the pristine white tablecloths. Everything was dazzling, almost overwhelming, and she felt as though every step she took echoed awkwardly through a world that was not meant for her. The black dress she wore was designer, but it had passed through at least 2 other hands before hers. She adjusted it at the waist, smoothed every crease as if trying to force herself into someone else, someone who could sit here and feel deserving. "Good evening, Miss Morgan," the maitre d' said, his tone polite, his expression rigid, trained from youth to confront the upper class. "Your table is ready." Rachel nodded, forcing a smile. "Thank you." Her voice came out smaller than she had intended. At 32, she still shrank back whenever she entered a place so unfamiliar. She walked past velvet-clad chairs, sliding by tables where men in dark suits and women adorned with exquisite jewelry conversed softly in words she did not belong to. Eyes flicked over her, not overly curious, but enough to make her clutch her handbag tighter. The table for 2 was set near a window, overlooking Central Park bathed in the soft glow of New York autumn lights. She sat, adjusted her napkin, and glanced at her watch. 7:42. Josh was 12 minutes late. A familiar sensation rose in her stomach, not exactly worry, but the vague chill of something beginning to fracture. The server approached, smiling politely. "Would you like a drink while you wait? Just water." "Thank you." She did not feel comfortable ordering wine, nor could she afford to drink alone in a place like this. She sat, eyes drifting over the surrounding tables. An older couple laughed softly as they poured more red wine. A group of 3 men in suits whispered to each other, holding glasses of amber whiskey. They did not need to prove anything. Their mere presence commanded authority. Josh had once said, "People need to see you in places like this," but he had never explained why she had to sit alone, waiting for him. In a secluded corner at the back of the restaurant, she noticed a table with 3 men. 2 of them faced outward, eyes cold, scanning the room as if searching for something. The third sat with his back to the restaurant, but his posture said everything: broad shoulders, straight back, a dark gray suit cut to perfection. He did not need to look to know who was watching him. One of the group tilted his head, speaking softly, and the man turned slightly. Rachel held her breath. His features were carved like a classical statue. High cheekbones, a straight nose, eyes intense yet quiet. She quickly turned away, heart racing so violently she pressed a hand to her chest. 7:48. Josh still had not arrived. His last message had come at 6:11. "I have left the office. I am so proud of you. Tonight is ours." She stared at the words, feeling them cruelly meaningless. Then, as if fate itself conspired, he appeared before her. Josh walked in, his white shirt crisp, his suit perfectly tailored, and on his collar a fresh smear of deep red lipstick so vivid it could not be accidental. She opened her mouth, but no words came. A female voice rang sharply from the doorway. "He has been lying to both of us." The woman wore a long coat, her hair disheveled, mascara smudged by tears. "He promised he would leave her, so why is he here? Does she know about Las Vegas, about the money he borrowed under her father's name?" The restaurant fell silent. All eyes turned toward them. Josh froze, pale. Rachel did not wait to hear more. She sprang up, her chair toppling behind her, and ran as if fleeing an explosion. She did not remember how she navigated the narrow aisles, only that she pushed open a metal door between two wine racks and fell into an unfamiliar room where the light softened and the air suddenly grew heavy. In the shadows, 3 men stood around a large wooden table covered with files and maps. 2 immediately reached inside their jackets, but the third, the man she had seen from afar, raised a hand to signal them to stop. He turned, eyes meeting hers. Time seemed to halt. Rachel did not know whether she trembled from fear or something else. "I am sorry," she whispered, voice catching. "I thought this was the exit." He did not speak immediately. He only studied her, as if reading the history of her life with every breath. Then, in a low voice, English tinged with melodic Italian accents like wind over stone, he said, "You are crying." And in that moment, Rachel realized the only one who had truly noticed her pain in that cold restaurant was a man capable of making an entire city bow, Dominic Cavallo. The door closed quietly behind Rachel, leaving the private room in stillness, while her heart continued to pound relentlessly in her chest. She stood there for a few seconds, struggling to catch her breath, her hands gripping the handles of her handbag, her face flushed, uncertain whether it was from shame, anger, or fear. She could not remain there any longer. With a hurried apology, she withdrew from the mysterious room, stepping back into the main area of the restaurant where whispers had already begun again, curious eyes flicking toward the entrance where the incident had just unfolded. And then, as if guided by fate, Josh appeared. He walked in with hurried steps, yet without hesitation, his eyes scanning the room as if trying to gauge what had transpired. Their gazes met, and Rachel froze. Josh frowned and approached the table, pulling out a chair and sitting down before her as if nothing had happened. "Terrible traffic," he said, without meeting her eyes. "I know you hate waiting, but there was really nothing I could do." He bent slightly to adjust his collar, either carelessly or deliberately revealing a streak of deep red lipstick along the seam. Rachel stared at it, silent. Her heartbeat was steady now, cold and deliberate, no longer racing. He had made no effort to hide it. Or perhaps he simply did not care. Josh glanced at the menu. "I'll order for us. We are already nearly 30 minutes late." He did not ask her preference, speaking directly to the server. "Baked lobster and a 2016 Chardonnay for me. She will have pasta with mushroom cream sauce. Lightly. Please." Rachel turned to him, eyes still lingering on the shock coursing through her. "You know I do not eat cream at night." "Once in a while." Josh smiled lightly, still avoiding her gaze. "It is an anniversary." Her throat felt dry, not from thirst, but from the sensation of being sweetly controlled, as if he were still playing a role and she the reluctant audience. She glanced at his collar again. "Did someone touch your shirt?" Josh frowned, looking down, then waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, probably a colleague. Excited. Must have brushed against it." He laughed, attempting to make it a joke. But Rachel did not smile. The woman's voice from before still echoed in her mind. About Las Vegas. Her father. The loans. "Do you know who that woman was?" she asked evenly, restraining herself. Josh flinched slightly but quickly regained composure. "What, probably mistaken identity. Someone overexcited. You know, strangers sometimes think people are someone else. Some people make a fuss for no reason." Rachel fixed her gaze on his face, searching for a crack in the carefully constructed wall of excuses. "She knew your name. She knew my father. She knew about Las Vegas." Josh laughed, but this time it was a stiff, forced smile. "The world is small. Maybe someone in the industry was gossiping." Rachel nodded, choosing not to argue. She knew that if she stayed, he would continue to bend the truth until it suited his interests. She had once believed him, once thought that even if the distance between her world and the cold financial sphere he inhabited was vast, at least he had been sincere. But tonight, everything had collapsed. Not because of the lipstick, not because of the woman who had stormed in, but because of the way he faced it all, as though she were a depreciated investment to be written off as quickly as possible. Rachel remained silent as the food was served. Untouched. Josh spoke about work, a potential new position opening next quarter, an upcoming networking event in Chicago. All as if nothing had ever happened. But in Rachel's mind, only the memory of the metal door leading into the secret room remained, and the gaze of that man, Dominic Cavallo. She did not know why he lingered in her memory so strongly. Perhaps it was the calm, cold precision. Perhaps it was the way he had signaled to halt when the other two had reached for their guns. Or perhaps, in the briefest moment their eyes met, he had seen her pain without a single word of explanation. And in that instant, it mattered more than any justification Josh Keating could offer. Just as the server poured more wine, the restaurant's main door burst open with a force that silenced the entire dining room. A woman appeared, tall and slender, her curly hair tangled as if she had just fought through wind and rain, a deep red coat hastily draped over her shoulders. Her voice rang out sharp, trembling yet full of fury. "Josh Keating, did you think you could hide from me forever?" Every clink of cutlery ceased, leaving only the soft exhalations of a few curious patrons. Rachel froze, her heart slowing for a moment before surging violently, as if her body anticipated what was coming. Josh turned, his face briefly paling before forcing a tight smile. "Alex, what are you doing here? We already talked about this. Do not call me that." She strode directly to their table, her trembling hand pointing at Rachel. "Do you know what he told me? That he would leave her? That he just needed time to settle money matters. But instead, he brought her here. Using her father's own money to pay for this dinner." The restaurant seemed to freeze. Rachel looked at Josh, his mouth slightly open, unable to form words. The woman took a deep, shuddering breath, tears spilling down with her choked voice. "He told me her father was a guarantor, that the money was an investment, but in reality, he was exploiting his identity to take out loans. Did he think I would not know? He promised he would tell her." 3 months already. Josh stood, trying to regain composure. "You are insane. Alex, what are you doing? Someone is recording this." "Let them record," she screamed, her voice breaking with tears. "The whole city needs to know you are a liar." Rachel heard whispers spreading around, phone flashes capturing images, chairs scraping as curious diners moved back to get a better view. She wanted to say something, but her throat was dry and tight. Her lips moved, but no sound emerged. Josh stepped around the table, trying to calm her. "Rachel, do not listen to her. She is a former client, turned down for an investment, and now making up stories. You know me. I would never harm you." But as he spoke, his eyes did not meet hers. They darted around, searching for an escape. Rachel felt a fragile crack inside her chest widen into a gaping fracture. All the times he had been late, the vague explanations, the abrupt calls all pieced together into a complete picture. And that picture was deception. The woman was being pulled toward the exit by restaurant staff. But she struggled, shouting, "He owes very dangerous people, and they will come after anyone carrying the Morgan name. Protect her father. Rachel, please." Her final words pierced Rachel's mind like a cold blade. She sprang to her feet, chair toppling behind her, breath ragged, heart pounding so violently she could not hear the surrounding noise. Josh reached for her hand, but she stepped back, avoiding his grasp. "Rachel, let me explain." "No need," she said, voice low and even, yet so unfamiliar she barely recognized it herself. "I have heard enough." Then she turned and walked away. Josh called after her, but she did not stop. All eyes followed, whispers swirling, phones aimed at her like hundreds of prying eyes. All she knew was that she had to escape this suffocating atmosphere. She ran past rows of tables, pushed open the staff door, and another one after that. The sound of metal hitting the wall echoed, mingling with faint scents of wine and smoke. She kept running, unaware of where she was going, only knowing that if she stopped, she would collapse. Her breathing became shallow, vision blurred with tears. She pushed open one final door. Light softening, the space abruptly still. The room was wide, the ceiling low, filled with the scent of leather and old wood. Unlike any part of the restaurant she had seen, She recognized 3 men standing there, turning simultaneously. 2 reacted immediately, hands moving swiftly inside their jackets. The third, tall and composed, raised only one hand. "Stop." His voice was deep, thick with an Italian accent, like steel forged in fire. Rachel froze, unable to comprehend what was happening. The man looked at her without blinking, and in his gaze, there was something that made her entire body stiffen. Power, danger, but also a strange calm. Unlike the chaos she had fled, he stepped forward, light falling across his face, carving each cold line as if sculpted. "Who are you?" Rachel opened her mouth, voice trembling. I just took a wrong turn." He did not answer immediately. His gaze lingered on her shaking hands, on the tears still glistening at the corners of her eyes. Then, slowly, in a voice barely more than a whisper, he said, "You are crying." And only then did Rachel realize that her tears had been falling without her knowing. The light in the room was markedly softer than in the main restaurant, as if this space had been deliberately separated from the rest of the world. The ceiling was low, the walls paneled in dark wood, and the furniture made of cognac-colored leather, centered around a large conference table strewn with documents, maps, and half-finished crystal glasses. Everything was arranged with a cold precision that Rachel had only ever seen in old Mafia films. 3 men standing by the table turned simultaneously as she entered. 2 reacted almost instinctively, hands slipping inside their jackets. And in that instant, Rachel felt as if she had stepped into something irreversible. Yet the man in the center remained perfectly still. No need to draw a gun. No need to turn fully. He simply raised one hand, deliberate yet calm. A gesture almost minimalist, yet immediately compelling enough to make the other 2 stop. As if pressed by an invisible pause button, he stepped forward, and now the overhead light illuminated every line of his face. It was a face that made Rachel freeze in place. Deep, shadowed eyes, a sharply defined jaw, a straight and high nose, and a cold, almost arrogant air etched into every feature. His black hair was neatly trimmed and slicked back with precision. She had seen him from afar in the back corner of the restaurant, but now the distance between them was only a few steps, and his presence seemed to dominate the entire space. He did not ask why she was here. No haste, no confusion. He merely observed her, inch by inch, as if appraising a precious painting that had been misplaced. Rachel swallowed dryly, attempting to step back, but her back hit the door. "I'm sorry," she said, voice trembling. "I did not know this was a private area. I needed a moment outside." He did not respond immediately. He tilted his head slowly, a motion any observer of predators would instantly recognize. "Your name?" he asked, deep and measured, each word carrying weight. "Rachel," she uttered. Then, to assert that she still held some control, added, "Rachel Morgan." A blink, a slow nod. "I am Dominic Cavallo." She had heard the name before, perhaps in the news, in financial articles Josh had left open on the kitchen counter, or at an exhibition with a mysterious sponsor. But standing before him, Rachel realized that rumors could not capture the true gravity of this man. Dominic was not the type to be loud or ostentatious. He was the kind of man who did not need to speak to command attention. He simply existed. "You came alone?" The question made her startle, but Rachel nodded, knowing Dominic already knew she was not truly alone. "I understand," he said, still unblinking. "And the man with you?" "Josh Keating." "What is he to you?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. Josh's face appeared in her mind, along with the lipstick, the evasive gaze, and the woman's voice hammering against her eardrums. She wanted to say boyfriend, but she was unsure if the word still held meaning after everything. Dominic stepped closer, leaving only an arm's length between them. He did not touch her, did not threaten, yet Rachel could feel a palpable, invisible force surrounding her. "I will not ask why you ran in here in panic," he said slowly, almost gently. "I just want to know if you need help." She looked at him, surprised. After all this, It was the last thing she expected from a man like him. I think I just need a few minutes to breathe," Rachel whispered, hands clutching her handbag. Dominic signaled to the two men behind him. They nodded and stepped out, closing the door behind them. Now the room held only the two of them. Rachel remained near the door, and he returned to the table, poured a glass of water, and placed it beside the chair across from him. "Sit," he said, neither commanding nor allowing refusal. She moved slowly, hands still trembling slightly, and perched on the edge of the chair, cautious as one entering territory not her own. Dominic sat opposite, hands interlaced on the table, observing her with a calmness that laid her bare. "Do you know that Keating is borrowing money from people he should not?" Rachel blinked, swallowing hard. "I have heard, but I know nothing. I was just dragged into it." "And your father, does he know Josh is using his name?" "No," Rachel said, more certain than ever. "If he knew, he would never allow it." Dominic nodded. "Good. Your father is still safe." The words made her blood run cold. She could not determine which was more frightening, that Dominic knew so much about her life, or that he had just casually ensured her father's safety as if he were a piece on a chessboard in a game she had not realized she was playing. Rachel met his gaze, striving to keep her voice steady. "Who are you?" Really, Dominic Cavallo sat there, eyes fixed on her, and in that instant, Rachel knew the answer would change everything. But he only lifted the glass of water, looking at her over its rim. "I am the man Josh Keating would never want to owe." Rachel did not know how much time had passed since she had stepped into that room. Everything unfolded like an unbroken chain of events. And though no one raised their voice or caused a commotion, she felt as if she were sitting at the epicenter of something far deeper and more dangerous than what had occurred outside. Dominic Cavallo was the type of man who needed no words to make it clear he controlled the situation. He sat silently, eyes fixed on her without imposing, as if waiting for her to recognize some important truth she could not yet name. But the quiet moment did not last. A loud knock reverberated through the door, and it swung open before anyone could grant permission. Josh stepped in, his face flushed with anger, eyes scanning the room before settling on Rachel, wide with disbelief at what he was seeing. Rachel stood immediately, reacting as though caught in the act of wrongdoing, though she had done nothing. Josh strode forward, voice low and harsh. "You disappeared from the table, leaving me humiliated in front of the entire restaurant, forcing me to face that scene alone. What were you thinking?" Rachel. Dominic did not move. He remained seated, eyes glancing at Josh's clenched hands before returning to Rachel. "How long have you known him?" His voice calm. Yet Rachel sensed a thin tension, like a knife sliding across wood. "Almost a year," she replied without looking away from Josh. "But perhaps I never truly knew who he was." Josh turned to Dominic, a mix of irritation and disdain on his face. "And who are you to interfere in our business?" Dominic did not answer. Instead, he rose slowly, each movement deliberate and weighted. He was half a head taller than Josh, and standing opposite him, he radiated a presence Josh could not touch. "I am the man who stopped my security staff from smashing your face in when you barged in uninvited," Dominic said, voice deep and steady, each word landing like stone on marble. Josh scoffed, but the smile never reached his eyes. "Fine. I'm just here to escort my girlfriend out. She was upset, and I do not blame her. She just needed an explanation." Rachel felt her blood run cold. "I am not your girlfriend," she said, each word precise and firm, "and I do not want to hear anything more." Josh stared at her, face a mixture of shock and disbelief at the unfolding reality. "What are you saying? You think you can run into a room full of strange men?" And Dominic stepped forward, positioning himself between Josh and Rachel. "Do not look at her," he said, low and calm. No emphasis needed. Yet Josh tensed instantly. "Excuse me," Josh almost laughed, but the sound died when Dominic tilted his head, gaze sharp as a blade. "I will not repeat myself." For a moment, the arrogance in Josh's eyes vanished, replaced by a vague fear he had never known. Dominic turned to Rachel, in voice softening. "Do you want to leave here?" Rachel looked at Josh, then at Dominic. In that instant, She did not need to deliberate. "Yes," she said. Dominic gestured, and the door opened. The two men who had been guarding outside stepped in without further question, merely nodding. Josh took a step back, but before leaving, he tried to speak. "Rachel, you do not understand what you are involved in. This guy, he is..." Dominic cut him off with a glance. "I am the man whose name you would never want to mention if you hope to leave here on your own 2 feet. Rachel did not look back. She walked out of that room, Dominic's footsteps following closely behind. And as the empty hallway stretched before her, she felt no fear, not because Dominic was safe, but because in a world full of lies, at least she knew he was speaking the truth. And at this moment, that was all she could trust. The corridor leading out of the VIP area was long and oddly silent. The clamor, the chandeliers, and the Le Carmine glamour receded behind them like a blurred memory, no longer touching the urgent reality Rachel now faced. Dominic walked beside her without haste and without speaking. Yet with every step he took, the distance between the world she had imagined as safe and the world that truly existed grew wider. They turned down another hallway, passed through a heavy oak door, and entered a small private sitting room, tastefully appointed but discreet. A minibar, a few deep green velvet chairs, soft warm light, all arranged like a refuge designed for conversations that should not appear on any ledger. Dominic signaled for her to sit and poured her a glass of water without asking. Rachel held the glass with both hands, not from thirst but as if clutching some tangible thing amid the weight of unseen pressures pressing on her shoulders. He sat opposite, fingers interlaced, gaze steady and unblinking. "Do you know who Josh is borrowing from?" Rachel shook her head. "I only heard that woman mention Las Vegas. And money. And my father." Dominic nodded lightly, as if confirming what he already suspected. "He is using your father's information, his reputation and education, to secure high-interest loans from illicit sources, mostly from money laundering networks that operate through casinos and risky investments on the West Coast." Rachel stared at him, her voice dropping to a whisper. "My father does not know about this. He is retired, living in Vermont. He has nothing to do with Josh, aside from once inviting him to speak to students." Dominic tilted his head. That very trust is what made Keating appear as a big catch to lenders. A young man, presentable, adept at making an impression, carrying the Morgan name with him. He did not need your father's explicit consent, only the shadow of his name. A chill ran through Rachel. She thought of the sudden business trips Josh had taken that never left hotel receipts or photographs. The times he dismissed her questions with a quick kiss and a promise to make it up to her. "How do you know all this?" she asked, trying to keep her voice level. Dominic leaned back, eyes never leaving her. "Because some of that money is mine." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Rachel gripped the glass. "Josh borrowed from you, not directly," Dominic answered. "He borrowed from someone I back, someone who does not suffer being deceived, and who dislikes having his name attached to dirty debts." Rachel exhaled with difficulty. "So what happens if Josh cannot repay?" Dominic spoke slowly, choosing words like a man reading out a verdict he wished he did not have to deliver. "Then those he deceived will come after the guarantor. And in the paperwork, the guarantor is your father." The statement hit her like an unexpected blow. She set the glass down, eyes wide, throat dry. "My father is not involved. He cannot. He is just a professor. He knows nothing of this world." Dominic nodded. "I believe you. But belief is worthless when forged documents are convincing. Your father could be investigated. Assets could be frozen. Reputation smeared. And if someone hotter-headed than I gets involved, the danger will not end there." Rachel stood, paced a few steps, then returned, hands pressed to her head as if to dam the flood of thoughts. "What can I do? I cannot let him be dragged into this. He is not well, and he has spent his life keeping away from trouble." Dominic watched her a long moment, then rose. He stepped closer. Not too close, but near enough that his voice would not be lost in any echo. "I will not let your father be harmed, but I need your cooperation. I need you to tell me everything you know about Josh Keating. His schedule, his contacts, the late-night calls, the places he goes without telling you." Rachel looked at him, bewildered but no longer hesitant. She understood this had shifted from matters of love or betrayal to something far grimmer, her father's safety. "I will do whatever you need," she said. "As long as he is not harmed." Dominic nodded slowly, without false consolation. "Start tonight." Rachel left the restaurant with her mind spinning. Dominic did not stop her. He simply watched her walk away with the gaze of a man who had already seen what she was about to face. The New York night wind was colder than she remembered. She tightened her coat, hailed a taxi, read her father's address almost unconsciously, and sat silently in the back seat, hands clutching her phone until her knuckles turned white. She had to call her father. She needed to say something. To warn. To explain. Anything to keep him from being pulled into the consequences of the deceptions Josh had woven. But how could she tell him that his name had been exploited in loans linked to criminal activity? How could she make a man who had spent his life living honorably, trusting in law and ethics, accept that his reputation was being used as a shield for shady dealings? She dialed, the phone ringing 3 times before he answered. His voice came through, deep and warm, gentle as always. "Rachel, my dear daughter, why are you calling so late? I was about to go to bed." She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "Father, you are home." "Right. Everything all right? Has anyone strange come to see you lately? Asked about investments or paperwork to sign?" A few seconds of silence passed on the other end. "No. No one. I've just been at home. Reading. Tending my plants." "But what is it?" "Child, is something wrong?" She bit her lip, hands gripping her thighs. "I think you need to be careful. Do not sign anything. Whether it is scholarship, funding, or collaboration letters. Do not accept letters from strangers. And do not let anyone unknown into the house. If anyone asks about Josh Keating, just say you do not know. Is that understood?" "Father, Mr." Morgan's voice dropped, full of concern. "Rachel, what has happened? That Josh, what has he done to you? Are you all right?" Rachel felt her throat tighten. Her father always noticed the slightest change in her voice. She forced herself to calm down. "I am fine. Truly. But I have discovered that Josh is not the man we thought he was. And I need you to trust me. There are very serious matters, involving legal issues and your reputation. I cannot explain all the details over the phone, but promise me you will not sign anything, receive anyone, or accept strange letters. Is that understood?" Father A paused on the line. Then Mr. Morgan's voice came slowly, deliberately. "All right. I trust you. If you say it is dangerous, I will be careful. But you must also be careful. If needed, leave New York for a few days. Come to Vermont with me." Rachel pressed her lips together, eyes stinging. Her father had always been like this, always placing her first, whether he fully understood or not. She promised she would think about it and hung up. But as the phone screen went dark, a shiver ran down her spine. Josh was not merely a betrayer of love. He was dangerous. Or worse, a tool for those even more dangerous. And Dominic Cavallo, whoever he was, had not exaggerated the situation. Rachel looked out the taxi window, the city lights blurring past like scattered memories spinning chaotically in her mind. She had thought that everything would stop at a broken relationship, but now she understood. This was the beginning of a war she had never prepared for. And in the midst of it, her father was being dragged in like a pawn. It was late when Rachel returned to Le Carmine. The restaurant was nearly deserted now, only a few staff members moving quietly among the empty tables beneath the soft glow of the chandeliers. She stood at the entrance for a few seconds, drawing in a deep breath, as if crossing that threshold again might cost her the last fragment of peace she still possessed. But she had called her father, had heard his promise to be cautious, and now it was her turn to keep her word. She stepped inside, not needing to ask for directions. The VIP corridor behind the restaurant had already etched itself into her memory like a map she could not forget. As she approached the heavy oak door, a man in a black suit appeared before her, his expression not hostile, yet far from welcoming. "Rachel Morgan," she said as calmly as she could manage. "I need to see Mr. Cavallo." The man studied her for a few seconds, then pulled out his phone, typed a brief message, and nodded before opening the door. Dominic was standing by the bar inside, his suit jacket removed, sleeves of his white shirt rolled high, a silver watch gleaming on his left wrist. He turned as she entered, not surprised, not expressive, just a simple nod, as though he had known she would return. "I need to speak with you," Rachel began as the door closed softly behind her. Dominic said nothing, only gestured toward the same chair she had sat in before. She took her seat, this time without hesitation, the hours of restless thought condensing into a calm, deliberate clarity. "I will help you," she said, her gaze fixed on him. "I know Josh's schedule. I know where he goes, the names that show up on his calls, and some files from the tablet he left at my apartment." Dominic remained silent, but a subtle flicker crossed his eyes. She continued, "But I have conditions." He leaned forward slightly, his voice low, not skeptical but inviting. "Speak." Rachel drew a deep breath. "I will not be a spy. I will not follow or entrap him. I will not plant recorders or steal documents. I do not know how to do those things. And I do not want to become that kind of person." Dominic nodded slowly, as if every word she said made perfect sense. "I do not need you to be anyone other than yourself." Rachel looked at him, feeling for the first time a faint sense of ease in the presence of this powerful man. "I want transparency. If I help you, I need to know when it ends. My father must be protected, and I want your word that Josh will not simply disappear. He must be held accountable, but in a way the law can still touch." Dominic tilted his head slightly, arms folded, weighing her words. "You still believe in the law?" he said, not mocking, merely observing. Rachel nodded. "If I stop believing in it, then I become no different from him." Dominic studied her for another long moment, then stood, walked to the wine cabinet, and took out 2 thin crystal glasses and a bottle of aged Italian wine. He poured both, slid one toward her, then lifted his own. "Good. You will not need to be a spy, just someone who listens. When Josh says something that feels wrong, you tell me. When his behavior changes, you tell me. You do nothing else. I will handle the rest." Rachel touched the rim of the glass but did not drink. She looked at him, eyes wary yet carrying a fragile thread of trust. "And my father, he is safe." Dominic nodded slowly. "If you keep your word, I give you mine, not a single hair on his head will be harmed. Do you trust me?" Rachel looked into his eyes, and though every instinct in her warned her against men like him, she still nodded, not because she truly trusted him, but because she had no other choice than to place her faith in the only man who had not lied to her from the start. Dominic extended his hand, large, rough, steady. Rachel reached out and took it, and in that handshake, an agreement was sealed, not on paper, but in fear, fragile trust, and an unspoken promise that things would not spiral so far out of control that neither of them could find their way back. It took Rachel nearly 2 days to plan her approach back to Josh. During that time, she tried to live as though everything were normal, yet inside, every thought revolved around what Dominic had told her and what waited at the next step. She was not a spy, and Dominic had kept that promise. But even though he had not asked her to sneak or break the law, the very act of returning to Josh, pretending nothing had happened, made her feel as if she were wearing a mask. A heavy mask, not because of what she was about to do, but because the man she had once trusted now made her measure every breath with caution. Josh texted first. The message was brief, cold, yet carefully timed to sound concerned. He asked where she was, said he needed to explain, that everything had been a misunderstanding. Rachel read the message 5 times before replying. "I need time, but I also need to hear from you. Let's meet. Somewhere, quiet." They chose a small cafe in Brooklyn, one that had once been their familiar haven when they first began dating. The place was nearly empty, warmly lit, soft jazz whispering through the air as if trying to pull her back to a simpler time. Josh was already there. When she walked in, he rose immediately, a nervous smile flickering across the face that had once made her feel safe. "Rachel, thank you for coming. I honestly, I don't know what to say except I'm sorry. She sat, resting her hand on the cool glass of water the server had just brought. Her gaze steady, but no longer soft. I want the truth. All of it. No excuses. No half versions. Without that, there's nothing left to say. Josh nodded, running a hand through his hair as though replaying a performance he was too tired to continue. He spoke of work pressure, of risky investments, of people he had trusted who had turned on him. He admitted to borrowing money, to signing questionable agreements, and to mentioning her father's name in negotiations. But everything, he said, was part of a short-term strategy mistakes he was already fixing. Rachel listened, nodded at the right moments, asked a few measured questions to keep him talking. She did not argue, did not confront, did not mention Dominic. She kept her promise to herself, not a spy, only someone who listened, encouraged. Josh reached across the table and took her hand. His eyes met hers, half pleading, half remorseful. He said he needed her, that she was the only pure thing left in his collapsing world, that with her by his side, he could rebuild everything. She neither pulled away nor held on, leaving her hand there like a prop in a play she had never rehearsed. I make no promises, Josh, but if you truly mean to make things right, I won't walk away. A faint smile curved his lips, and something inside her seemed to die a little more, not from love, but from knowing he still believed he could control her. They left the cafe together. Josh drove her back to the apartment they had once shared. As she unlocked the door and stepped into the familiar darkness, she turned to him one last time before closing it. Do you have any meetings tomorrow? She asked softly. He nodded, listing a few names, a few places, a few times. She nodded in return. Good luck. And Josh, this time, tell the truth. The door shut. She leaned against it, exhaling not from exhaustion, but from having survived her first test, one move in a game she had never imagined playing. And now, every detail Josh had uttered, every name, every time, every location would be etched in her memory, not for Dominic, but for herself, and for her father. Rachel met Dominic the following afternoon, in a private office on the top floor of an old building in Tribeca. The room was spacious, the polished wooden floor reflecting the soft amber light that filled the space. With classical paintings lining the walls, it felt at once like a silent library and a war room for men who never appeared in the news. Dominic stood with his back to the window, gazing out over the rows of red brick buildings below. When Rachel entered, he did not turn right away. His voice was steady, low, and even. How much of what he said was true? Rachel closed the door behind her, removed her scarf, and set her bag on a small table beside the chair. She knew he was speaking about Josh. About 60%, she replied after a brief pause. But the rest, the part he didn't say, is what frightens me. Dominic turned then, his expression unchanged but his eyes colder than usual. Whose names did he mention? Rachel listed them. 3 people. One was a lawyer, another a financial advisor with a history of fraud, and the third someone known only as Ray, whom Josh described as a connection in the underground investment world. Dominic sat across from her, fingers interlaced, his voice dropping to a register so low it barely qualified as speech. Do you realize where you are? Rachel, she nodded. In a game I never learned to play, but I'm learning. Dominic tilted his head. Part approval, part scrutiny. You are intelligent, but intelligence isn't enough. You must understand this is no longer about love or betrayal. This is a money laundering network that crosses borders. These are contracts capable of destabilizing entire banking systems. And Josh Keating is merely a small link in that chain. Rachel inhaled sharply, but kept her composure. I'm not protecting him. I'm only doing what I said I would. Dominic leaned back, his eyes narrowing. The problem is, you're doing it too well. Well enough that I have to ask myself, are you certain which side you're on? The question struck her like a blow to the chest. She clenched her fists, steadying her voice, though her throat felt tight. I'm sitting here telling you everything I know, betraying someone I once loved. And you're asking which side I'm on. Dominic didn't flinch. Because in this world, Rachel, everything has a price, even loyalty. You once believed in Josh. Now you claim to believe in me. But what about tomorrow? What if you discover I've done things you cannot forgive? Rachel was silent. Part of her wanted to shout, to deny the doubt he was planting. But another part, colder, more rational, understood that this was a test, not of trust, but of endurance. I'm not naive, she said slowly, but I still have limits. I won't sell anyone out for personal gain. I'm helping you not because you're good, but because you're the only one who can keep this from going too far. Dominic nodded, a faint flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes. You've changed, he said, his tone softer for the first time. Rachel met his gaze directly. And you, how much of what you've told me is true? Dominic was silent for a long moment before he rose and walked back toward the window. When he turned again, the coldness in his face had given way to something wearier, almost human. I've done things I'm not proud of, he said quietly, but never for personal gain. Never for power or money. I've done them to keep balance in a world where the law no longer reaches. Rachel could not tell how much of that she believed, but in that moment, she understood something with absolute clarity among men who hid their motives behind countless masks. Dominic Cavallo was the only one who looked her in the eye and spoke truths that were hard to hear. And perhaps that was what made him the most dangerous ally she could have and the only one she had left to trust. Night had already fallen by the time Rachel and Dominic's conversation ended. Yet neither of them moved to leave. The room seemed suspended in time, wrapped in the muted glow of its dim light and the strange stillness that filled the air. Beyond the window, the streets below the building had begun to empty, car lights stretching into endless trails through the darkness of New York. Dominic poured more wine into Rachel's glass, but not out of courtesy this time. He did it as an unspoken invitation, a silence that required no explanation. Rachel took the glass, touched her lips lightly to its rim without drinking, and looked at him for a long time. He sat across from her, his eyes deep and stripped of the mask he usually wore. The chill was gone, along with the guarded tone and the calculated restraint that always marked his words. What remained was simply a man, past the midpoint of his life, sitting before a woman he no longer saw as a pawn. Rachel set her glass down, leaned back slightly, her gaze steady. I don't know if what we're doing is right. Dominic tilted his head, his expression calm but his voice gentler. What are you afraid of? That I no longer hate you the way I thought I should? That everything I'm feeling might not just be the consequence of circumstance? Dominic rose and walked toward her, each step thickening the air between them, as if all the emotions they had restrained for days were beginning to find their escape. When he stopped in front of her, Rachel did not move away. He raised his hand, stopping just short of touching her face, close enough that she could feel his warmth. If you're afraid, we can stop. No one is forcing you to continue. Rachel met his eyes and shook her head gently. I don't want to stop. I just don't know if I can keep going, without losing myself. Dominic's hand came to rest against her cheek, his gaze softening, as if he could see the child still hiding inside the woman who had been worn down by deceit. You've already lost so much, Rachel, but if you lose the last bit of your calm because of a man like me, maybe it's worth it. She lifted her hand, pressing it over his. For the first time since they had met, there was no tension between them. No defense. No barrier. Only two people, each scarred in their own way, trying to find something real in a world built on illusions. She stood, slowly, as though each movement required permission from her reason. But reason no longer spoke. When their lips met, nothing was rushed. The kiss was not the fevered kind that movies invent. It was deep, quiet, achingly human, two souls fumbling to recognize one another in the dark. Dominic's hand moved to her waist, drawing her closer, while Rachel tilted her head slightly, her palms resting on his chest. Feeling the slow, deliberate rhythm of his heartbeat, they said nothing as he led her into the adjoining room, where a wide bed draped in white sheets waited under a soft, amber light that glowed like a steady breath. Nothing happened in haste. Every touch felt like a question asked, every meeting of their eyes like an answer given that this was not weakness, not an attempt to fill a void, but something real taking shape, rising quietly above the dangers and deceptions that surrounded them. When their bodies finally found each other, Rachel no longer felt imprisoned by fear. She was no longer the betrayed woman. No longer the professor's daughter living under threat. No longer an unwilling witness to a secret war. She was simply herself. And Dominic, in that moment, was not the man of influence or the unseen negotiator in the city's shadows. He was only a man holding her hand with the last sincerity he had left in his life. Later, they lay still in the warm half-light. Their breathing joined, saying nothing. Both knew that morning would not come easily. But tonight, they did not need to think about that. For the first time in months of being lost, they had found a place to rest, a quiet pause in the storm, and perhaps the beginning of something neither had ever dared to imagine. The first light of morning slipped through the thick curtains, spilling a warm golden stripe across the pristine white sheets. Rachel opened her eyes, feeling the cool smoothness of the linen beneath her hand and the steady rhythm of Dominic's breath beside her. She did not move right away. The first sounds of the city below were still distant, blurred, as if New York had chosen to postpone its usual chaos to grant them one rare, fragile moment of peace. Dominic was still asleep. In the morning light, the sharp edges of his face had softened. The air of command, the alert precision, the constant readiness to control, none of it remained. He was simply a man breathing quietly, more real than he had ever seemed since the day they met. Rachel turned her face toward the ceiling, her thoughts slowly returning. The names Josh had mentioned, the clues Dominic had shared, the layers of deceit growing thicker each day, and then the memory of the night before came back like a silent gust strong enough to make her heart ache, not with regret, but with the knowledge that she could not let it fade like a passing dream. Dominic woke not long after. He turned toward her, saying nothing at first, his gaze acknowledging her presence before he placed his hand gently over hers, grounding the morning in truth rather than illusion. Rachel sat up, wrapped the sheet around her, and turned her back for a moment, gathering what courage she had left. Then she spoke, her voice steady but not cold. "I need to say something." Dominic remained still, letting her speak. "I don't want last night to become something we're afraid to mention, but I also can't let it blur everything else. I don't belong to your world, and you don't belong to mine." Dominic slowly sat up, leaning against the headboard. His eyes held no judgment, only focus. "So you're saying we should stop?" Rachel shook her head. "No. I'm saying that if we continue, I need an agreement. I need clarity. I need you to understand that I'm not a woman to be kept behind stone walls or summoned at midnight." Dominic raised his brows slightly, an unguarded flicker of surprise. "You want freedom but still wish to stay. I want to be myself," she answered. "I don't want to lose my voice or become part of any bargain. I'm helping you because I believe what you're doing matters. But that belief doesn't mean I belong to you." Dominic studied her for a long moment, then smiled faintly, not mockingly, but with the quiet admiration of someone hearing what they hadn't expected yet found worth listening to. "What are your conditions?" Rachel turned back to face him, her eyes unwavering. "I want to be able to walk away whenever I feel things have gone too far. I don't want to live in the shadows, or check my phone every time I speak to my father. I want to work, to breathe, to be Rachel Morgan, not Dominic Cavallo's girlfriend, not a witness, not someone who needs protection." Dominic nodded slowly, the kind of nod that acknowledged the woman before him was no longer the frightened stranger who had once burst into his room by mistake. He rose, buttoned his shirt, and turned toward her again, his expression holding something close to respect. "You are none of those things, Rachel. You are the one thing I never anticipated. And because of that, you have the right to draw your lines. But remember, if you step outside this circle, no one will be able to shield you from what's coming." Rachel stood too, her gaze steady, stronger than her words. "Then teach me how not to need protection. Teach me how to live in your world without losing myself." Dominic looked at her for a long time. Then, for the first time, he nodded in full acceptance, not from power, but from respect. And that was what made Rachel feel, for the first time, that she was moving in the right direction, even if the road ahead had yet to be mapped. Dominic stepped out of the room a few minutes after their conversation, leaving Rachel alone in the soft morning light still filtering through the curtains. She sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping his shirt around herself, her mind tangled with everything that had just been said. She did not feel regret, yet she knew she had crossed a fragile line between emotion and power, between freedom and implied restraint. When Dominic returned, impeccably dressed as always, there was something different in his eyes, not complete concession, but a kind of acknowledgement born from experience, from understanding that in his world, allowing another person their own voice was rare. He sat in the chair opposite her, the distance between them enough that neither felt threatened. "He agrees with what you said," he began, voice even and deliberate. "You will not be held back, controlled, or turned into a shadow in any of my dealings. But Rachel, I also have limits." She did not object, only nodded lightly, waiting for him to continue. "There are matters you will not be allowed to question. There are places you cannot enter. And there are times when, if I ask you to leave, you must do so without argument. It is not a command, but the only way we can coexist in this world without harming each other." Rachel listened, eyes fixed, understanding more than anyone that with a man like Dominic Cavallo, every condition had a reason. Sometimes, not knowing was the only way to survive. "So you want me to trust absolutely?" she asked. Not provocatively, but as a test. Dominic's lips curved slightly, not a smile, but an acknowledgement. "I do not expect absolute trust. I only hope that when you cannot understand, you will still choose to stay." She lowered her head, thinking, then lifted it, voice steady. "I can do that. But in return, I want to remain myself in this relationship. No lying to my father. No disappearing without reason. When I need time for myself, you must respect that." Dominic nodded. "I promise. But you must promise me one thing in return, that if one day you can no longer endure, if you wish to step out of this game, you will tell me first. No leaving silently. No vanishing as if you never existed." Rachel looked at him long and then nodded gently. "I promise." They sat in silence for a while, allowing the agreement they had reached to settle into the air, into the rhythm of their hearts. Neither spoke of last night. Neither painted the future. But in the way Dominic leaned forward, placing his hand lightly on her knee, and Rachel rested hers on top in a natural reflex. It both understood that this agreement was more than a contract between two adults. It was a subtle boundary between trust and limit. And in a world where everything had a price, maintaining that boundary was sometimes the only thing that kept affection from being tainted by power and doubt. That morning did not end with a kiss or an embrace, but with an understanding silence. Rachel stood, dressed herself, composed as if nothing had ever stepped beyond convention. Dominic escorted her to the door, neither holding her back nor watching too long. Both knew that if what they were building was real, it did not need to be held tightly. A promise alone was enough, and that promise, that morning, had been given through the things they did not say. Rachel began working at Dominic's gallery a week later, not so much as a formal offer but as a natural continuation of the changes that had begun between them. She held no official title, signed no contract, and had no job description like she had in previous positions. Yet each morning, she stepped into the space, filled with light and the quiet presence of the paintings, carrying the sense of someone trying to find a rhythm of normalcy within a reality that no longer resembled the one she had known. The Cavallo Gallery was unlike any workplace Rachel had experienced. It was not loud, not ostentatious, and it did not try to sell art as if selling elegance itself. Instead, every piece was chosen with care. Every wall had its own purpose. Visitors were few, but all were connoisseurs, capable of perceiving, feeling, and spending without haggling. Rachel managed the artwork files, wrote exhibition notes, and occasionally guided visitors through the gallery. Gradually, she learned to read the eyes of those viewing the paintings, to notice when someone lingered before a work with depth, and how their fingers sometimes trembled lightly on the frame as though touching a memory they had never named. Dominic did not come every day, but whenever he entered, the air seemed to shift. None of the staff addressed him as the boss, yet all fell silent when he appeared. With Rachel, he was neither overly familiar nor distant. They exchanged glances, A few brief words about the work. Short conversations in his private office, where he sometimes offered her a sugarless coffee and asked how she felt about the latest piece sent from Florence. Something changed within Rachel, not because of Dominic, but because she herself was shifting. Early doubts now gave way to a quiet she had never known she needed. She no longer had to guess what Dominic was thinking, nor try to solve him like a complex equation. She began to accept that some people cannot be understood logically, only sensed through the way they exist in the world. One late afternoon, as Rachel adjusted the lighting over the main exhibition area, Dominic entered without announcement. He stood behind her for a long moment before speaking. His voice so soft it was nearly a whisper. "You've changed this space." Rachel turned, the light falling on her hair making her look softer than usual. "I'm not sure I've done much," she replied quietly. Dominic stepped closer, his gaze pausing on an abstract painting streaked with muted gray and blue. It had once felt cold. Now, it no longer did. Rachel said nothing, only followed his eyes. In that moment, she realized no words were necessary. Everything was gradually becoming clear in its own way. She did not know where the future would lead them, but in the present, within this quiet space of color and detail, she felt herself standing in a place where emotions needed no explanation, only the freedom to exist fully as they were. The evening of the charity gala unfolded in the lavish setting of a historic mansion in the Upper East Side, where each stair was lined with crimson velvet, and every crystal chandelier gleamed like suspended crowns in the air. Rachel stepped out of the car in an ivory silk gown tailored to perfection, her hair loosely pinned, lips painted a deep red. She was no longer the hesitant woman who had first entered Dominic Cavallo's world, but a natural part of the refined and commanding tableau that filled the night. Dominic waited at the entrance, his tailored tuxedo hugging his form. The black tie knotted with precision, as if it were an extension of his own persona. As Rachel approached, he extended a hand to support hers, a gesture that seemed rehearsed over years. Yet the gaze he gave her was unscripted. For a fleeting moment, the people around them blurred from view, and when her hand rested on his arm, she felt the world settle in a strange and perfect balance. They walked forward amid the formal acknowledgement of curious and wary eyes. Those who knew of Dominic Cavallo understood he rarely appeared with women, and if he did, he had never introduced anyone with a closeness that implied alliance. Rachel understood this, yet she walked beside him without trembling, without lifting her chin defensively. She was not there to prove anything. She was there because it was a step forward, and Dominic understood that more clearly than anyone. The party continued with soft music and the clink of glasses keeping pace with polite greetings. Rachel was introduced to names she had only seen on art magazine covers or in financial columns. Some shook her hand. A few offered faint smiles, but most looked to Dominic, awaiting confirmation, which he offered without hesitation. As they approached the terrace, where small clusters of guests conversed under warm yellow lights, one of Dominic's longtime friends, a prominent auctioneer, looked at Rachel and then at him, half joking, half testing. "And who has he brought this time? Dominic, a talented curator, or just an honored guest?" Dominic glanced at Rachel, his hand tightening around hers for a brief moment, marking a new boundary. "This is Rachel Morgan. Mine." The words were soft, yet carried clearly enough for those nearby to hear. In the murmur of the surrounding crowd, a quiet pause appeared, as if every eye had recalibrated to see Rachel in a wholly new light. She did not appear surprised. She merely tilted her head in acknowledgement to those nearby, then looked back at Dominic with eyes neither resentful nor grateful, but recognizing that he had done what she had not requested, yet also not obstructed. In that instant, without applause or public declaration, Dominic had placed Rachel in a position no other woman standing beside him had ever occupied. Not protected, not possessed, but walking alongside him in a room filled with people accustomed to reading situations more than feeling emotions. As the gala continued, Rachel stepped briefly away to speak with an artist she had once admired. When she turned back, she saw him still standing among the powerful guests, his gaze quietly following her without concealment. And for the first time, Rachel felt that her presence beside him was no longer accidental. It was a deliberate choice, acknowledged even among those who rarely recognized anyone. On that night of the gala, as voices continued to rise and glasses of wine sparkled, Rachel knew something had shifted, not just in the way others looked at her, but in the way she looked at herself. Rachel stood beside a bronze sculpture in the garden behind the mansion, where amber light from scattered lanterns rendered the space both romantic and mysterious. She had just finished speaking with a collector from Boston when she sensed the shift in the air, not the colder bite of the night, but a subtle intuition tracing her spine, as if an old scar had been brushed by accident. When she turned, Josh was standing less than 10 paces away. His tuxedo was impeccable, the familiar half-smile in place, yet his eyes betrayed mockery and calculation. Rachel froze for a moment, a familiar wave rising like smoke. Anger, confusion, and disgust intertwined. Josh approached with an ease bordering on audacity, as if they were old friends casually reunited at a party. He tilted his head, regarding her with the same gaze that had once made her believe every lie. He smiled. "Rachel, you really know how to make an entrance." For an instant, the space around them seemed to vanish. Those nearby began noticing the tension, a few curious eyes shifting toward them. Rachel remained composed, neither stepping back nor forward. "Josh, I don't think you were invited here." Josh shrugged, his tone light, teasing. "Some invitations reach the right hands when one knows how to pay attention, and I've always known how to be where I need to be." From a distance, Dominic appeared, striding quickly and decisively like a storm advancing. Those nearby instinctively stepped aside, and when he reached Rachel, no introduction was needed to explain what was happening. Dominic placed a hand on her back, both protective and assertive, his gaze locking onto Josh in a look that chilled the surrounding air. He was not welcome here. Josh laughed, making no move to retreat, but his eyes flicked to Dominic's hand on Rachel. He nodded subtly, as if confirming a suspicion he had long harbored. So it was true. She and him. Rachel said nothing. Dominic did not wait. He stepped forward half a pace, his voice low and cold, each word distinct. "If you remain here another 10 seconds, I will ensure this is the last time your name appears on any guest list in this city." Josh hesitated, his gaze flicking sideways, but he maintained a calm facade, a smile thin as ice over a winter lake. He glanced at Rachel one final time, as though seeking a trace of hesitation, a hint of regret, but Rachel stood her ground, silent, unyielding, requiring no shield from Dominic. She was no longer the woman who had sat alone in a restaurant, waiting for someone to explain. She was standing here, fully visible, protected not only by power but by both clarity and respect. Josh turned and walked away, and the curious eyes dispersed as if nothing had ever happened. Dominic looked at her, his voice low enough for only the two of them. "Are you all right?" Rachel nodded firmly. "I'm fine." He studied her for a few more moments, then extended his hand. She placed hers in his without hesitation. They stepped back into the main area of the gala, as though no intrusion had occurred. Yet Dominic could feel, deep in Rachel's gaze, that something had shifted. She no longer needed anyone to back her, but he would remain the only one she allowed beside her when storms came. That night, among people who trusted only power and interest, Dominic had not only publicly claimed Rachel as his own, but had also demonstrated the way he chose to protect her, not through authority, but through timely, clear, and unconditional presence. 2 days after the gala, Rachel received a message from an unknown number. Just 4 words: "He needs to see you." She stared at the screen in silence, then set the phone down without replying. Yet her mind could not dismiss it. Something was unfinished, a final link that had yet to close completely. She knew she owed Josh no further chance. Yet the silence made her feel as though the past was still standing behind her, waiting for a clear farewell. Finally, the next morning, she sent a message. 10 o'clock. Bryant Park. No recording devices. No security. No Dominic. Just you and me. Josh arrived exactly on time. His suit was sharp, his hair neatly styled, but this time his eyes lacked the arrogant confidence they once held. Rachel sat on a stone bench near the fountain, her light gray coat making her appear both composed and distant. When Josh approached, she did not rise, nor did she smile. He sat beside her, leaving a safe space, and exhaled. "I don't know why you agreed to meet me, but thank you." Rachel looked straight ahead, at the passers-by starting their day. She needed no thanks. She only wanted closure. Josh was silent for a moment, then spoke, his voice deeper than usual. "You've changed. Your voice, your eyes, the way you sit here. You are not the woman who forgave me after countless lies." Rachel turned to him, her gaze neither angry nor sad, only calm. "Because I am no longer that woman, and you are no longer the man I thought I knew." Josh lowered his head, hands interlaced, as if holding something back. He admitted it all, the shady investments, using her father as a stepping stone into the academic world. The times he chose career over truth. He did not excuse himself. He did not plead for forgiveness. He only spoke, as if in doing so he might reclaim some fragment of conscience left to him. Rachel listened, without interruption. When he stopped, she spoke slowly. "I did not come here to hear your confession. I came to tell you that from this moment on, our past no longer binds me. All memories, all wounds, I leave them here." Josh looked up, a fleeting glimmer of regret in his eyes. "So with Dominic, this is your future?" Rachel nodded without hesitation. "I do not know what my future holds, but at least it will not be built on lies. And if there is one thing I have learned from all of this, it is that I no longer need anyone to define my worth." Josh pressed his lips together and nodded slightly. He stood, looking at her one last time. Perhaps that was something he had never understood about her. Rachel. She was stronger than he thought. She said nothing, only watched him walk away, his figure gradually merging into the moving crowd. She sat for a while longer, listening to the water from the fountain and the gentle rhythm of her own breathing. For the first time in many months, she felt an emptiness within, but not from loss. It was the space cleared of all that was old, ready for what was new to enter. It was not forgiveness, nor strictly liberation. It was a true farewell, not through tears, but through decisive silence. She stood, adjusted her scarf, and walked away lightly, without looking back, carrying nothing with her except herself. On that autumn morning, the campus of Columbia University was awash in golden leaves, the air crisp yet clear, as if New York itself had paused to prepare for something good about to return. Rachel stood in the corridor outside the literature lecture hall, a light wool scarf draped over her shoulders, holding a steaming cup of coffee. Her heart beat slowly and evenly, not from nervousness but from the emotion threading through each breath. The familiar wooden door opened. Professor Morgan stepped out, carrying his worn leather briefcase, his silver hair neatly combed, the dark brown overcoat giving him the air of a man who had always believed in the order of knowledge. Rachel stepped forward without speaking, offering only a smile. He posed, his gaze softening for a moment as he saw her, then returned a gentle smile, reminiscent of their last encounter in the hospital months before. "Today is your first lecture after over a year of suspension," she said, as if she could hardly believe what she was witnessing. Professor Morgan nodded, his voice deep yet vibrant. He had thought he would never return to this lecture hall, but life, it seemed, sometimes makes amends. Rachel knew better than anyone that this was no coincidence. It was the result of months in which Dominic had worked quietly behind the scenes, rallying influential voices, untangling legal entanglements, and clarifying the networks Josh had manipulated to undermine her father. Dominic had never detailed his actions, but Rachel knew. He kept his promise as he always did, without spectacle, without recognition, ensuring only that the person he cared for received the justice they deserved. As her father entered the lecture hall, Rachel remained outside, peering through the glass panes. The students were nearly seated, attentive, when Professor Morgan opened his textbook. His voice carried rich, resonant, and imbued with the inspiring cadence that had captivated generations of students. She stood silently for a long moment before turning and walking away. That afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the tall buildings, Rachel returned to the Cavallo Gallery. Dominic was seated in his office, reviewing a sketch from a young artist in Chicago. When she entered, he looked up, his eyes immediately understanding without question. Rachel set her bag down on a chair, approached his desk, and remained silent for several seconds. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but betraying her gratitude. "Thank you for keeping your promise." Dominic inclined his head, his gaze softening. "I've always said I never promise what I cannot deliver." Rachel nodded and stepped closer. "I never imagined my father would return to the lecture hall, but he has stronger than before." Dominic remained silent, then gently placed his hand on the desk as if to remove any unnecessary distance. "You do not need to thank me. I did it not because of a promise. I did it because I know that if a man like your father were crushed by someone like Josh, we would have nothing left to hold on to." Rachel looked at him long, her gaze deeper, gentler, no longer tinged with the doubt of the first day, nor with blind faith. It was trust verified through action, through quiet yet steadfast presence. She moved around to the back of the desk, placing her hand on his shoulder in a wordless gesture of thanks. Dominic looked up, did her eyes, and for a brief, full moment they shared silence. In a world rife with bargaining and betrayal, keeping a promise, seemingly small, became a rare testament to human decency. And it was that more than power or reputation that made Rachel choose to stay, to walk with that man, stepping into a future with a heart lighter from the burdens of the past. That evening, as the city began to dissolve into flickering lights and the traffic on the avenues thinned, Dominic guided Rachel out of the gallery earlier than usual. He did not say where they were going, only told her to dress warmly and bring her favorite scarf. Rachel asked no questions. She was accustomed to his way of keeping a part of the plan hidden in pivotal moments, as if he preferred things to unfold with intention rather than arrangement. They drove along the Hudson River, eventually stopping at an old pier where a small boat had been prepared. Dominic personally helped her onto the deck, where a thick woolen rug had been laid, a small table set for two, and glass lanterns were scattered along the sides. There was no music, no servers, no of the usual extravagances of elite evenings, only the gentle river breeze, distant city lights reflecting on the water, and the quiet of a space held exclusively for the two of them. Dinner was simple, with red wine and the pasta Rachel had once mentioned in a passing conversation. She smiled in recognition, and Dominic only looked at her, offering no explanation. They ate in silence for a while, and when the wine was nearly halfway gone, Dominic withdrew from his jacket pocket a small box neither red velvet nor glittered, just a matte black wooden box with a carefully polished brass clasp. He opened it to reveal a simple ring, the stone modest, yet catching the purple hue of the sunset reflecting off the river. Rachel studied the ring for a long moment, then looked up to meet Dominic's gaze, which waited patiently without imposing. He did not beg. He did not kneel. He only wished to say that, if she wanted, she could choose to walk with him not as a woman in need of protection, but as an equal. He did not require a forever promise. He only needed to know that she chose him, not out of obligation, not out of the past, but because she believed in something between them. Rachel did not answer immediately. She touched the ring lightly and let her hand rest, her eyes thoughtful. She recalled their first meeting, in a dark room, when her world had been collapsing, and Dominic had been the only hand extended amid the chaos. From that moment, their journey had ceased to be accidental. They had traversed loss of trust, pain, lines of power, and unexpected moments of tenderness. Yet above all, Dominic had never forced her into any role. He let her choose whether to stay, to work, to love, and now, to accept an offer unburdened by control. But as an open door, Rachel looked up, meeting his eyes. "Are you certain a man like you, with so many shadows in his life, wants to bind himself to a woman like me?" Dominic smiled faintly, a rare smile without defense. Having lived so long in darkness, he understood the value of someone stepping forward unafraid. "You are unlike anyone, Rachel, and I do not want to let you leave if I can keep you willingly." Rachel exhaled softly, her hand still on the edge of the box. Then nodded, not a hasty agreement, but the affirmation of someone who had thought long enough. But I have conditions. Dominic raised an eyebrow. Waiting. I will wear the ring, but I do not want a wedding right away. I need time to ensure this decision comes from both of us. And if one day I feel lost, I want the freedom to step back, without being held by pretty promises. Dominic nodded without hesitation. An agreement. He extended his hand not to place the ring, but to take hers, as a recognition that true love does not come from ceremony or vow, but from the voluntary presence beside one another each day. Rachel slid the ring onto her finger herself. The ring was not dazzling, but fit perfectly. She gently squeezed his hand, lifting her gaze to the sky beginning to scatter with stars. In that moment, amid the calm water and the distant glow of city lights, no words were necessary. The choice had been made, and it was hers, completely. 1 year after the evening Dominic proposed, Rachel officially assumed the role of art curator at one of New York City's most prestigious contemporary museums. No longer the girl once lost in a lavish restaurant with a broken heart. She now entered the gallery each morning as the architect of artistic experiences. A woman who understood not only the value of beauty but also the worth of herself. She was not a curator because she belonged to Dominic Cavallo, but because her talent and dedication had been recognized by even the most exacting colleagues in the field. Every exhibition she oversaw carried a story, a slice of life conveyed through imagery, color, and emotional depth. In each of those stories, Rachel left her own mark through honesty, compassion, and a heart that had once been shattered but had learned to heal. Dominic continued to walk alongside her, not as a supervisor or a controlling presence, but as someone who understood that true love is not about confining someone within boundaries, but about creating space for that person to flourish freely. He rarely appeared at the events she organized, but whenever he did, his eyes always found her in the crowd, not to watch over her, but to quietly take pride. Rachel understood that their love was not a fairy tale, nor a flawless romance. They had collided, questioned, and almost let go. Yet it was the boundaries and voluntary choices that gave their relationship its enduring strength. And looking back, Rachel felt no regret, only gratitude. Gratitude for having had the courage to step forward, the strength to return, and the sincerity to start again as a better version of herself. Rachel's story was not just about love, but about reclaiming oneself after a collapse, emerging from darkness, and learning to place trust in what is right. It is a journey in which each of us can see ourselves, when faced with choices between safety and courage, between vulnerability and growth. If this story touches something within your heart, click subscribe and share this video with your loved ones. The YouTube channel Underworld Love Stories will continue to bring you moving, profound, and inspiring stories every day. How do you feel about Rachel's journey? Does it make you reflect on the relationships in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We sincerely want to hear the genuine feelings from the depths of your heart. Greetings and see you in the next video. Wishing you good health, peace each day, and joy in every choice you make. Farewell, and see you in the next stories on Underworld Love Stories.